Hello and welcome! I am Brett J. Rasmussen, and this is the Brotherhood of Geeks watch along to the road to PS5. It has been announced pretty much yesterday, which would be March 17th, so we're recording March 18th. It was announced yesterday that that PlayStation, with Mark Cerny, who is the head designer, I guess, of the PS5, he is going to be doing a massive, quote, deep dive into the PS5, pretty much the specs, features, or at least that's what I'm speculating about it. And I'm very much excited for this. I've been waiting for this for a very long time, pretty much ever since they announced that the PS5 exists with the Wired articles from last year. What I'm very much looking forward to is seeing what features it has, the backwards compatibility, how far backwards compatibility. So if it's going to be, PS3, PS2, PS1, because we do know it's going to do PS4, but we don't know if it's going to go further than that. What other features it's going to do outside of backwards compatibility, and what games are going to be coming, because that's going to be a big selling point. I don't know if they're going to do pricing. I don't know if they're going to announce that. That'll be very exciting if they do. So yes, also, just want to have everyone out there. I hope everyone is doing well. Everyone is safe because of this big, huge pandemic that's happening right now. So please, everyone, take care. Take care of yourselves. Stay home if you can. Anything like that. So, and I'm not going to go ahead and say what it is because, monetization stuff, but what I'm going to be calling it is the Last of Us virus. Pun on words, all that kind of good stuff. Everyone just be safe out there. Take care of yourselves, and honestly, look at the good things. We're going to be getting an announcement of the PS5. I'm excited. So I'm going to go ahead and move over.
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC. But we do have some super exciting news about PS5, and who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim. There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console.
Okay.
Like you all know, I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console,
Yep.
and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for.
Yep, and it was really expensive.
Starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is
Listening to the developers.
Which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators.
Yes.
We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say,
Yep.
that games
Especially your third party.
anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers.
Jeez.
And it is incredibly valuable.
Oh, yeah, of course it would be.
The feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk.
Okay.
It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution.
Mm.
Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with
Yep.
a brand new feature set.
Big graphics,
In many ways, but
features.
time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console.
Yep.
In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running.
Oh.
I'm trying to minimize that.
Okay,
On
so
other
the
hand, if we're trying
kind
to
of
reduce that dead
where
time to
graphics
zero,
kind of sit
that
where it
means the
plateaus.
hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity.
Yep.
What required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model.
Yep.
Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed.
Ooh.
Striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore.
So the SSD is very important.
Conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design.
Yeah.
To me, the SSD really is the key to
That's. It seems like that. This is the solid state drive is very important to it. Mind you, it makes games loading faster, and that's very important to gamers right now.
An SSD in it. That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds.
Yep.
I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible.
Yeah.
If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disk and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking, and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data.
Which, when you install games, why it takes forever.
Very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. To put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload, and you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from
Oh, 5 gigs a second?
different from hard drive.
Holy crap!
As such, if you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about a quarter of a
Oh my god, that's
We're talking
nuts.
orders of magnitude.
A
Meaning
quarter of a
roughly
second to do
100
2 gigs?
which means
Jeez.
a
For
second
load
SSD,
time?
the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking,
Yep.
like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put it
Yeah.
differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so.
You can use that to hide the loading in the
Having
background.
A 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jak 2.
Oh, yeah.
It's 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in,
Yeah.
the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second.
Yeah, I mean,
If you
streaming
think about
is becoming
it,
very
half a
important now.
second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm
Jeez.
describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the will sometimes take a long time.
Oh my god, patches take forever!
That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or 2. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks. So no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into it.
Really?
No installs as you know them today.
Oh, so it just inserts them in instead of needing to take the new assets and make a new file and put those new assets into it.
Game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be
It just sits there? Dang.
On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used.
I like that.
A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf.
Good.
This is
That's a
one
good
of the
thing.
reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size.
Ooh.
So, back to the dream.
Like going from normal
Here's
PS5 to like a Pro or something.
boot the game in a second.
Yep.
No load screens.
Yes.
Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away. The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed.
Huh.
For PlayStation 5, our
So it's
goal
not-
was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed. And
Okay.
there are a lot of them. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location.
To make the final
SSD
game.
speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off.
Wow.
So to solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with
Because
regard
cost efficiency is honestly key.
Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or re-downloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment.
Okay.
Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD.
Okay,
Kraken
I like
had only been
that.
out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second.
Wow.
To compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional.
Jeez.
There's a lot more in the custom I/O unit, including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or two in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck.
That's good.
There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of
It just does it itself.
happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabytes a second really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4.
Wow.
And allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put in the console.
Yeah.
Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit just like our SSD does, so they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the
So is it going to be easily to install the solid-state drive then?
at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second.
Okay.
In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5.
Yeah. I hope it's easily to install, because if it's not, ugh.
No standard for the height of an M2 drive. And some M2 drives have giant heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year-end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us.
Okay.
Back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution.
So that was listening to the
This
developers.
was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU. We need new GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console.
No, it's just
Of course,
a more
many
powerful
capabilities
PS4.
result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before. And we need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
'Cause you don't want your system to overheat.
The GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing.
You don't have to use ray tracing.
The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release
But you don't have to
versions
use
on
it.
PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean? One
Which is
way
good.
to achieve backwards compatibility is to put the previous console's chipset in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3.
With the old
That's, of
Fat
course,
Boys.
extremely expensive.
Yeah.
A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips.
Huh.
Meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation.
That's great. Yes.
With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which
It's called the
brings
Geometry
handling of
Engine.
triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability.
Wow,
Using
okay.
primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special
So it's just going to be easier to like
Another
put
major
like
new feature of our
shapes
custom
together, I
RDNA
guess.
2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations. With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animations.
Which one is it, though?
Only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly...
It's always a balancing act between those two. It's always...
Part of the reason for that
between
is,
that.
historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console.
Yep.
Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much.
Huh.
Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level.
Huh.
If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong,
It's
console
bad.
is loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly.
Yep.
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the
Flashing red light of death on the
uses
PS3.
56-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan. So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So, if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly
58
PlayStation 4
CUs.
It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency.
So that kind of becomes the default.
Until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly.
Huh.
36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers.
Well, that's
The
good.
final of our 3 principles was about finding
New dreams.
It's important for us.
These
as
have to
a
be the
hardware
new
team to
things
find
that-
new ways to expand
New
and
things,
deepen
new
gameplay.
features of
That's
why
what
you want to
we
get a
focus
PS5.
on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second.
Jeez.
So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to
Yeah, that cell processor.
perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit.
Yeah,
There's
but it's not.
unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4.
It's not. Well, it's not easy to develop on there.
Progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience.
Huh.
Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which
ones
We
wouldn't.
wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve.
Like when you're playing Spider-Man and like just the car noises and
Instead, we used
everything.
Lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you. Then at some point, your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming
Where
from.
you can hear it.
To the right of you,
How-
behind you, above you.
How
This can
far away,
immerse
that kind of
you
thing.
Further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use Dead Space as an example, I know, old school.
Hey man, Dead Space is good, and it's Dead Space is a good
Back in the day, when you
example for it.
began Using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So, how do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, All those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion.
Makes
The
sense.
way that the sound changes based on direction and frequency can be encoded in a table called the head-related transfer function, or HRTF.
HRTF.
Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process.
What?
We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down
Hey, it's Sid.
array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
Jeez.
Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So
okay. So they're making it easier to use like the PS4 was, but they focused on graphics, which was more important, hence why it was hard to develop on the PS3. But they're using the audio piece, which was important in the cell architecture, and using it in the PS5. I like that.
The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined.
Wow.
If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed soundbars or the like.
Because that's the only way you do it. You have to have that Dolby Atmos, and not every TV has that.
We wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense.
So 3D audio is PlayStation's kind of big thing.
Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF.
So now you have to predict where it would come from.
the sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps
Where it's going to
changing,
come from,
and that can
what
cause
side.
phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches.
Yep.
That's a lot of variation.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development...
It's easier, it's more finite, you can control because you just have these.
For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction.
From
even
everywhere.
around you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker,
Yep.
and vice versa.
Right. Yep.
We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also looking to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a...
They're really working on audio. This is a big thing that PlayStation is really focusing on.
It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there? Like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence. Well, the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game-playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different.
Yeah.
With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled. And
So how would you figure that out then? How would you figure that out for each person?
In the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest HRTF. Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in on the HRTF.
So apparently we're guinea pigs.
That it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone to experience that next level of realism. Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today, and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD?
You gotta have something.
I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time today.
Okay. Okay, so that's a lot of information. Holy crap. Okay. I'm just going to give my final thoughts on just the whole thing in entirety. But I will be making a video after, just kind of to kind of an overview and my thoughts, kind of more complete thoughts. This is just raw reactions, raw thoughts. I want to do one that kind of I can sit on this, mull over this, kind of think about it. But okay, some of the things I like. I do like it that they're going forward with the 3D audio. I think that's a very good feature. That's a really good thing to go after. Because I remember I'm actually using the PlayStation Platinum headsets right now to use this. And the reason why I love the Platinum headsets is the 3D audio aspect that is in here, where you can, when I've been playing like God of War or Marvel Spider-Man or Horizon Zero Dawn, I can hear from which direction and how far away someone is coming from, how like or like where the wind is blowing, or anything like that. And that's why I really do like that. And they want to implement that into the system, so you don't need a headset. You just have your TV. You don't need a sound bar with surround sound speakers for that Dolby Atmos, because Dolby Atmos is in those features. They're not in a TV. I don't believe they've made TVs that can use that. So I do like that, but they're throwing a lot of focus into that, and I don't like. It seems like we're guinea pigs for this, and I don't know how I feel about that. Like it's not to me it sounds like this is where we want to go, but we can't get it finished. We can't get it to the point we want it to. We can't get the 3D audio to be where we want it to be when we want the PS5 to come out. There we go. I had to say that. So we're going to kind of be guinea pigs for that, and I don't know how I feel about that. There was a lot of talk and a lot of talking about, like, you didn't really talk about, like, how graphics are going to be jumping. Mind you, graphics can't really jump further than where they are now. So with the PS5, they were really focusing on load times, and that's very, very good. Load times is very important. Especially, I loved hearing about how patches work, how they actually work, like how the system reads it, and when you install a game, where like you install the game and then if you have patches, what it does is that it takes a copy of that file and then it makes a new one, and then it puts the new assets into there, and then it has to move it all around. Hence why these patches take a long time. And if you have a big game, it takes about like 15 minutes to half an hour to load it up and then do the patches and everything. So if and then having it be, I think he said, like 5 gigs per second to load. If that's the case when you install a game, 5 gigs a second for a 30 gig game, for example, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, that would be 6 seconds. 6 seconds for a 30 gig, 12 seconds for 60. Like, I believe so, but like really, really fast. I like that. That is a very, very good thing. The backwards compatibility to the PS4, and what they're doing is they're kind of using like legacy tech, so they're not like, oh, here's the PS4, pieces that you are able to play it and you like put them in, and that's why one of the reasons why the PS3 was so expensive when it first came out, because they just took parts of the PS2 and parts of the PS2 and an emulator from the PS1 and threw it in there along with that cell architecture. And I think this is what they've been shooting for years, because he talked about the PS3 and how the cell architecture, and it very much was proprietary for Sony, for PlayStation, hence why it was hard to develop for it. That's why when they made the PS4, they just went, all right, it's like a superpowered computer, very easy to use, very easy for developers to make. I mean, mind you, maybe I just got my hopes up far too much. I was expecting to hear about games, and I was expecting to hear about, like, okay, come on, come out swinging, come on, like, let's go, like, we're, like, what is it, April, May, June, July, August, September, like, 6, 7, 8 months tops, like, we're losing time, like, or are you going to announce everything around June? I mean, E3 isn't happening. You're going to do a state of play. Like, are you going to use a state of play to kind of do your big PS5 announcement and everything? Like, at least give me something. Like, give me a game that, like, what is Insomniac doing? What is Ready at Dawn doing? That would be good. I would love to hear that. Whether it's Order 1886, the sequel to it, or something different, or I don't know. You have tons of worldwide studios that are working on games, that have to be working on games on PS5. So, like, what are they? Like, give me something for me to get excited for. Like, they did this with the PS4 Pro. They did a similar thing for this, where Mark Cerny came out and he talked about all the specs of the PS4 Pro, and I was like, cool. I don't, like, I'll get a Pro later. And what sold me on a Pro wasn't a press conference telling me the specs and tech. Sure, that's awesome, and for people who love specs and tech and numbers and stats, awesome. I like hearing about it, but you could go ahead and do a PlayStation blog post and tell me it, and I'd be like, great, sweet. Give me the rundown. You don't need to go full into this, at least for me. This is just for me. I know there are some people out there who love hearing, like, how everything works and the inner workings of the system. But, like, man, I'm a bit disappointed. I'm a bit disappointed because I feel like that I pretty much, like, maybe wasted an hour. Like, it's good that we have this information, but it's look, I would just wish we had something to like, just like, even if they just give me a montage of games, or even one game that someone is working on. Like, what you said that you were playing a game, or like someone from PlayStation, you were playing a PS5 game to test things. What was that game that you were talking about, Mark Cerny? Like, I'm glad you came out, and I'm glad we have all this information, but, like, Xbox pretty much did a 2-minute, like, video, 2 to 3, maybe 5 minutes tops, can't remember, but it was like a little short video just going, here's all the specs, bam, done. Like, I would have been fine with that. Like, you announced it yesterday that you were going to do a deep dive into the PS5, and this was a deep dive. Like, you're not wrong. This is very much a deep dive. But I guess my expectations also were, like, deep dive was like, talk about the PS5, tell me the features, what does it do? Like, I was literally, probably my problem was that I was expecting it to be the reveal event from 2013 for the PS4. Like, that was so perfectly executed. Like, and now we know that, like, this was supposed to be at GDC, which was late last month, early this month, which got canceled. So, I don't know. But I'll be doing another video right after this. After this, you'll be seeing another video about me kind of doing an overview of what Mark Cerny talked about, and I want to kind of think about this a little bit more. But guys, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/Brotherhood of Geeks. Press the subscribe button and also like, comment, share. We always appreciate that. It lets people know about us, that kind of thing. And also press the bell icon. That way, whenever we put up a video, you know we put up a video. You can also follow us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/The Brotherhood of Geeks. And they can also follow us on Twitter at DualShockedBOG. That's the name of our PlayStation podcast, DualShockedBOG. And then you can also follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Brotherhood of Geeks. We may actually talk about more about this on an episode of DualShocked. Because I have a feeling that Spectre and Guru Blaze have their own words to say about this. But yeah, I don't know where Sony's head's at right now. And again, maybe I'm too much into the console war, but right now it seems like Xbox announced two new, they're getting Hellblade, and we already know about Halo Infinite. Like, Hellblade was a brand new game. We only know about this game called Godfall, and that's not even it is an exclusive, but it's not from their worldwide studios. So what is everyone working on? What is Guerrilla working on? I don't know. I'm a bit disappointed, but I'm gonna go ahead and sit on this, think about it, and I'll come back to you in the next time. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Brett J. Rasmussen, and as always, live to play, play together. I'll see you guys next time.